your second episode, isn't it, Chris?
It is indeed.
And you can discuss employment trust, option trust.
Episode of this, and I don't want to hijack this session, but did you cover in that, Chris, the actual reasons why you decided to go down this route of an EOT with your first business?
I probably did a bit.
And is that relevant to talk about, or later on?
Well, yeah, I don't know whether have we officially started, or is this still just a informal? Well, I think so. A little bit like we touched on a few minutes ago, I was aware that I was losing interest, and I think one of the big concerns for me was it had gone from a stage of I was the super passionate one, really wanting to push things and kind of dragging the staff along with me, to some of the senior staff saying, "Hey, Chris, wouldn't it be great if we did this? And I'd love us to do that." And me just going, this just all sounds like extra stress, and it might lead to more money, but I just don't want it. So I think that was one of the main things for me, was the feeling that the senior staff were more enthusiastic about pushing the business than I was. And that feels an unhealthy situation to be in. I suppose aligned with that, theoretically, I could have said, well, look, you guys run the business, I'll take more of a back seat, but I'll still own it. And that, I'm not sure how well that can work. Well, I'm sure it can work in some situations, but it didn't sit well with me. I feel like I would permanently be having an argument with them about how much salary they were entitled to, and how much was it fair for me to get as profit. So the EOT just seemed a nice way of sort of ticking a lot of boxes. So it enabled me to cash out. I did get, some people think it's altruistic. It can be, but it really doesn't have to be. And I'm not going to pretend that it was for me. I made a decent amount of cash, tax-free, from doing the EOT sale. So it enabled me to de-risk, I guess. If you've got all your eggs in your business, sure, you may have, a bit of money in a savings account and a home, but a lot of your value is tied up in that business, and all kinds of things could happen, be it COVID Mark II, Russia, Ukraine, whatever, that could potentially kill your business overnight through no fault of your own, things like AI, all this kind of stuff. So there is something nice about just kind of cashing in your chips. I feel like it's a bit like if you're at the casino when you're running a business and you're making all these modest gambles and you're doing well and you're winning, but you always know that the next gamble could go horribly wrong. So there's a long waffly answer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that.
So, I mean, the other thing to say is people do it at different ages. So I'm probably relatively young for doing it. So I'm 43 now. I was 39 at the time. For a lot of people, it is retirement. They are 65, give or take 10 years either way. And they feel like they've been there, done that, and they kind of want out. But again, normally over a graduated time frame. And the EOT gives you the scope to do that. That does not mean it's problem free, because I sometimes think it's easier for everyone to understand if you say, right, up until this date, I'm the boss. From that date onwards, you are the boss. That's quite binary. But when you have this, well, I'm still here, I'm going to kind of let you make lots of decisions, but every now and then I'll say, no, that's a really bad decision, don't do that. You can get fallout between, and this is where sort of coaching can be helpful to just translate between different people and what they each want. So is that right if I share my screen now? So yeah, this is a little tool that we've built recently, I suppose. At its most basic, what it does is just allow someone who doesn't know a huge amount about EOTs to run through a bunch of questions to check that it's going to be suitable for them and give them roughly what they're hoping to get. So that's what this is all about. And Spencer has kindly agreed to be a guinea pig, I think possibly one of his client data. So we maybe won't mention the client name for confidentiality purposes, but we'll be putting some answers in. So it's broken down into 3 stages. This is the kind of black and white, will you qualify, yes or no? This second bit is perhaps the bit that most people will be most interested in. How much will you get for it? And I had a lovely little chat with Ollie a few days ago. I think valuation can be a real issue with founders. I suppose it's one of those things where if anyone's suggested a number to you that's quite high, you get that stuck in your head. And as far as you're concerned, that is what your business is worth. And anyone who tells you otherwise is an idiot and they've undervalued your business. So probably what we'll come out with here will be lower than what you might have heard elsewhere. But I'll talk in that in a bit more detail when we get to it. And then there's just this bit about mentally prepared. It's just people do need to understand this is them selling their business. So you need to have your head around that. It will not be your company anymore. You can still work there, but it's a big deal. So not something to just go, oh, I get a great tax break, let's do it. So first, the sort of black and white criteria. So the key thing here, probably for most of you and for most people we speak to, you have a very simple company structure. There is one limited company. You are the owner of it, possibly with a spouse, possibly with a business partner, but there's no group. But this is just what we're checking here. So again, this top one will be the most common and apply to most people here. You can get the perks of an EOT if you sell your shares in a holding company, as long as it's of a trading group. So if you're in a situation where, for whatever reason, you've got two businesses that do different bits and bobs, they're both owned by one holding company, and then you own the holding company. As long as you are happy to sell that holding company, great, you can do an EOT sale. What you cannot do, on the other hand, or at least not get the tax perks, is to just sell one company from within a group. So again, if you're in that situation where you've got a holding company, you've maybe got two trading companies in there, one of those you want to keep long term, the other one you want to sell to an EOT, you could potentially do an EOT, but if you did it just with things as they are, be warned, you're not going to get the tax breaks. So more realistically, what you would probably do is have a chat with your accountant first and do a bit of restructuring. So basically you separate those out so they're no longer in a group. You own company A, you own company B, and then you can just sell one of them to the trust. So for this purpose and for your company, Spencer, would it be the top one?
It was actually a holding, the middle one, the shares in a holding company. There are, exactly as you described, two trading companies that complement each other. They're sort of run as one business, but separate legal entities, and they're owned by a holding company. So
perfect. Okay,
that was the option.
The current owner of the holding company is happy for them to be sold as a job lot, basically. Yeah?
It would be sold together. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, this next one, again, it's a bit of a noddy one, but it's just to make sure people are aware. You can potentially sell a minority stake to an EOT, and some people do this. So if you currently own 100%, you might think, well, I don't want to give up control yet. I still want to see it as my company, but I want the staff to feel incentivized. So maybe I might sell, let's say 10% or 40% to an EOT. That way I still retain a majority stake. I still have the control, but the staff then know they are formally entitled to a share of any profits, rather than it just being me sort of discretionarily thinking, oh, I think they've done quite well, I'm going to award them this, that, and the other. Realistically, that's quite rare though, and it's in some respects it's a bit of a shame, because I think it does add a lot of fear to a founder. You know that basically that first thing you're going in, bang, once it's done, you don't control it. You're reliant on it continuing to succeed for quite a while to get paid, but you've handed over control. So that can be quite scary, but as things stand, to get the tax perks, you really need to do that. So I'm going to tick yes for you here, Spencer. Is that okay?
That was correct, yeah.
Again, this one's really, you know, there's a right and a wrong answer, but it's really more just explains to people that this has to be the case. So profits must be shared equitably. Now, what does that mean? It does not mean that everyone has to get the same, no matter how senior or junior they are. It can mean that, but it doesn't have to mean that. But it does mean you're quite restricted in how EOT profit share payments are made. And if anything, I personally see this as more of a blessing than a curse, because one of the things that in the early stages of running my business was a real joy was saying, hey, look, we've had a really good month. Here, have some bonuses each. You have this, you have that. That felt lovely. But a little bit, you know, a few years down the line, when we had quite a few staff, the staff tend to talk about their bonuses, and all of a sudden someone who gets given £1,000 bonus, rather than saying thanks for my £1,000 bonus, says, well, why the hell did that guy get £2,000? I'm really pissed off. And I'd have to justify it and sort of defend myself. So for me, at least, I think it's quite nice that there are basically set rules. You follow these rules. So if anyone says, I'm not happy with how much I got, those are the rules, we follow them. So the key thing that you cannot do is distinguish, you know, set people out individually. So you've done really well, so we're going to give you a much bigger share of the profits. You, on the other hand, have been very lazy, barely turned up, so you're going to get only a very little share or nothing at all. But what you can do is either everyone gets the same, equal across the board. You can do it based on salary. So the highest paid staff get proportionally more than the lowest paid staff. You can do it based on hours worked. So full-time staff get more than part-time staff. and you can do it based on length of service. So people who've been with you 10 years get more than someone who joined last week. But really this question here is just making it clear that you're going to lose that discretionary ability to just pick and choose. Having said that, if you remain the director and you're still in charge of people's salaries, you will still remain in charge of who gets how much. And you can always do bonuses that are discretionary, but they would not be EOT profit share bonuses. So what does that mean? That means they won't benefit from £3,600 tax-free per year. So I realise that's the first time I've mentioned that on this call. But yeah, the two main perks of EOTs. One is the capital gains tax break for the founder. And if the people in this room are currently business owners, that's the more exciting one for you. The less exciting one for you, but the more exciting one for the staff, where there are sufficient profits to pay out to the staff, as long as it's done in line with EOT profit sharing rules and you meet the various criteria, the first £3,600 of that per person is tax free. But it still all goes via the payroll, which is the sort of gives the benefit that it doesn't suddenly mean all of your staff have to do a personal tax return. This last one here, I mean, I think for the example Spencer used works out being quite straightforward. In principle, it's very straightforward, but where you get ones that are a bit borderline, it can end up being a bit of a nightmare. So what it's all about is how many shareholders are there relative to employees. The key thing that I think HMRC are trying to avoid here, imagine a situation where, let's say, 4 siblings owned a company 25% each, and they've got one admin employee, and they want to sell to an EOT. Well, HMRC would say, nothing's really changed with regards to the ownership of the company. It used to be owned by 4 people, now it's kind of owned by 5. The 4 family members totally still control it because they're 80% of the staff. So no, you can't have a whopping great tax break for doing that. But then you've got that awkward question of, well, where's the line? And that's what the participator ratio does. So in short, you need to have at least 5 people on the payroll for every 2 shareholders. Spencer, are you happy divulging numbers?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. So the number here was 50.
So 50 people on the payroll. How many shareholders?
2.
2. Is that husband and wife or 2 unrelated business partners?
They are slightly related. One is the nephew of the other.
Okay. Now, number of employees with share options. This is one of those awkward ones where potentially, if their percentage is low enough, they may be irrelevant from this point of view. But even if they've just got options, they don't actually own those shares yet, they potentially could still be counted here. So realistically, if someone puts a number in here, it's more just, right, you're going to need to do a bit of further digging. But we put it in here just to flag that for probably most businesses, no one will have share options, so it's a no and it's straightforward. But for those who do, just to make it aware that it could be a problem. So does anyone in that company have any share options that you know of, Spencer?
No, that's a no. I mean, the 2 above actually is slightly incorrect as well, but there is a couple of children of the main shareholder, but sort of excluded them for this exercise. But
well, I mean, if you're happy to, I'd sort of rather do this properly. So
okay.
Do these children own shares in their own name?
Yes, they do. Yes. So let's make that 4 then.
Okay, so there's 4 shareholders. Well, I mean, you've actually kind of hit on quite a good point here. It's something that's a bit of a frustration for me. The number of times I'll speak to a founder, who owns the shares? Oh, I own all the shares. Okay, great. You're a 100% shareholder? Yes, I am. We take that in good faith. We think, oh, you're absolutely fine on this point. And then further down the line, we start digging into company's house data and we go, oh, hold on a second. You know, your wife owns 40% of the company. Oh, yeah, but she's my wife. So, you know, she just does as I tell her. She doesn't really count. Oh, and also there's a company that owns 20%. Well, yeah, but I own the company. So that doesn't really count. So it is important that we know all shareholders here, and especially people where perhaps, you know, most commonly for tax reasons, they may, you know, this applies to me. I considered it my business. And even when I was giving you the numbers earlier, Spencer, I was saying these were mine. It was mine and my wife's 50-50. So when I say I retained 40%, technically I retained 20%, my wife retained 20%, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Right, this final point. So for this purpose, ignore any employees who are actually shareholders because we've already factored them in the shareholder one. But are there any other people who are on the payroll and they are related to one of the shareholders, but they're not a shareholder themselves?
That was 0 for me.
0. Okay. Great. So, I mean, I can tell you confidently this one's going to meet this with flying colours, but let's press ahead to this valuation piece. So again, for anyone who's had valuations done before, I would say, I suppose there's 2 very different ways it can go. One is you speak to some kind of business broker who will look at it, go, do some magic and then tell you your business is worth 10 million. Or you go to the accountant route where they'll give you some spreadsheet with 1,000 cells on it, loads of complicated calculations that come to a number at the end. Really what we're doing here is a very simplified version of that accountant's one. So you may have heard of sort of EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization, and valuations being a multiple of that. That's exactly what we're doing here. So Spencer, what was the profit for the last year? Profit before tax?
970,914.
970,914. It's just shy of $1 million. Pretty impressive business there.
It wasn't before I got involved.
Of course. You
Of course, yeah.
Sorry,
next one, yes. Yeah, that's 3,079,454. 3,079,454.
Okay, I would just say this business is probably at the top end of the kind of size Go EO typically look at, but you know, this should still work. One of those things with net asset value and shareholders funds, I'm a bit nervous that maybe some business owners won't know what that means, but what I'm hoping is if they look at their last accounts, their accountant provided them, they should find on the balance sheet a number that's called exactly that. So hopefully it's fairly easy. And the cash at bank figure, again, as at that year end.
That's 496,578.
496,578. So just to check, net assets of about 3 million, but only about 500,000 in the bank. So presumably lots of assets in buildings, investments, cars,
stocks.
Stock. Okay. This one I appreciate it's a little bit fluffy, but just is the business struggling and dwindling a bit? Is it fairly steady Eddie? Is it growing quite quickly?
Well, I left it where it was pinned there because it's increasing between 10 and 20% at the moment. But I thought on a sale, they would just obviously want to make sure that it's at least remaining stable. So I just left it as it was in that case. Sure.
Okay. Well, I mean, that will probably, on its own, that will give a slightly lower valuation figure if we're expecting more modest growth.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do the advanced one. I mean, for other people who might want to do this, you can, that's all you need to put in and it'll give you a figure. But because Spencer's very savvy with the business numbers, what I'm doing here will just take into account a few more things. So the main one is the salary paid to the owner. So again, I'm imagining most of you in the room, if you own the company you work for, quite possibly you take a salary of 12 grand a year, nothing more than that, fairly pitiful. You may well take a big pension contribution, but the key thing is you would not work for the company doing what you do for 12 grand a year if you didn't own it. You're doing that because you're also probably getting dividends, maybe huge amounts, may not be, but also you're working on building that company so that that capital growth comes to you as well. But when we're looking at valuing the business, we need to kind of remove that element from it. So, you know, the profit is arguably artificially inflated because it's got that person working in a very senior role for very little money. So this adjustment we're going to do here is just going to try and rectify for that a bit. So Spencer, what salary paid to the current owners in the year? Have you got a figure for that?
Well, it was 176,084, but between them. But yeah, it's that's the biggest difficulty in the business. I mean, there's all sorts of directors' transactions in this business and loan accounts and all sorts of elements to it. So it's quite tricky. But that's the amount that in combination that went through. And of which only 1,806 was pension.
Okay. I'm just thinking where I realised perhaps when you were doing this before, you didn't consider the children because you didn't have them as shareholders. Realistically, it doesn't matter. Well, I'm anticipating that the children probably are on fair market value salaries.
They're not on the payroll, no.
Oh, they're not on the payroll at all?
No.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. That doesn't change anything massively.
Yeah.
So now, again, this next one is, I appreciate, very subjective, but if you had to say, right, what would a fair market value salary be for those owners?
I put in a number of 300,000 for the two of them.
Enough. I mean, 176 grand for two people, that's not a tiny salary in the first place. So you know, they are taking more than a few business owners would, but
they're taking considerably more than that, but not in salary.
in dividends, I'm guessing, or
dividends and overdrawn loan accounts.
well, the dividends makes perfect sense, and that's deliberately not reflected here because, again, when we look at the profit before tax, that's also before dividends. I mean, the loan account, that's just a short-term thing. You can't have an ever-increasing loan account that never gets rectified one way.
They're planning on it being rectified on sale. We just need to make sure they don't run out of control, because there is a bit of an issue with it looking like the buyer has paid too much for the business to repay those loans. So, but yeah, we're conscious of that.
All right, fair enough.
There's an element of me not being able to stop them doing what they're doing as well.
Well, I can empathise with you there. Certainly, we've had a few conversations like that. I mean, well, again, just whilst we're talking about that, I think it is one thing that owners do consider when doing an EOT sale. You know, when it's your company, there can be a temptation to think of your bank account and the business bank account as the same thing. You know, you want to take some money out, well, just take it out of the business bank account. You own the company. Why the hell wouldn't you?
That's exactly what happens.
Yeah, from a very practical perspective, if you're still a director of the company post EOT sale, you could still do that. But I think it's really important that you try and stop doing that. Again, you want to just try and think of yourself a little bit like an employee. I imagine none of you would be very happy if one of your employees just said, oh, by the way, I took £5 out of the business into my personal bank account just because I needed to, you know, I wanted to buy a car and I thought that would help. You'd say, what the hell? No, you can't do that.
I wish it was only £5,000, Chris.
Well, yeah.
But
right, interest received, anything significant there?
£253.
253.
253, yeah.
I mean, these modest sums like this, these aren't going to make a big difference.
No.
For completeness. Depreciation?
79,267.
7. And any amortization?
0 there.
No. Okay. Right. Final page. So this is, again, it's kind of noddy questions where really there's only one right answer, but it's just making sure you know what you're getting into. So who is in control? You're selling a majority of your company shares to an EOT. You may still be heavily involved, but won't always have the final say in decisions. So again, we're just making people very aware that potentially they could carry on being the managing director for the foreseeable future. So day to day, they would have control of the business's decisions, but there will be a new party above them, the trustees. Probably won't go into too much detail about that today unless people are particularly interested in that. So there will be people above that managing director who potentially, if they were really unhappy with what the managing director was doing, could kick that managing director out. Obviously, whilst you're the sole shareholder, no one can kick you out. You're invincible. So people just need to be aware of that they will no longer be invincible. There will be situations where they can be overruled on decisions. This second one, again, a noddy one, but it concerns me that we sometimes hear people saying, oh, well, I'll do this, I'll get the tax break, and if it doesn't work out, well, I'll just reverse it. Well, good luck with that. You know, you've sold the business. Theoretically, you could buy it back, but you'll have to negotiate with the new owners, which will be the trustees, and all of the tax perks would unwind if you did that. So you really need to think carefully before doing this. No different to doing a trade sale or anything else. It's not something that you can back out of or change your mind on once it's done. And this one, I think Spencer touched on earlier, which might scare off some people. So the final question, are you confident your business can succeed for 5+ years post-sale? This is really important because with an EOT sale, there is no external money coming in. So obviously, if you do a trade sale, there's someone else who's putting their hand in their pocket, might be a business, might be a rich individual, giving you a big check. Money that was totally outside of this business beforehand. That's not happening here. You're going to be paid out of the profits of the business. So potentially a decent chunk of that can be retained profits if you've built up a bit of a war chest to date, and we'll see some example numbers very shortly. But almost always you're going to be reliant on being paid from future profits of the business. So the business needs to continue to do well for you to get paid. And also, just worth, if it doesn't continue for at least 4 years from the end of the tax year, you're going to lose your tax perks as well. So again, nothing's ever guaranteed in this world. Can anyone guarantee their business will succeed for 5+ years? No, but you need to do your absolute best to make sure it does. And that could include staying on as managing director. Again, we talked a little bit right at the beginning of the call about disappearing off into the sunset. In theory, you can do that with an EOT, but realistically, you can only do that if you have a very good senior team who already know what they're doing, are very confident. Then great, you can disappear off if you want. And we're done. So I hope you won't take more than a couple of seconds. So because I wouldn't quite say we've rigged it, but we've given all the sensible answers. We're going to get a lot of ticks here. Obviously, if we'd answered some of them the other way, it would give a big red warning to say, you really need to go and reconsider this because what you're currently planning might not work. So this participator ratio we talked about. So even with the 4 shareholders, including the 2 children, the participator ratio is 8%. So put simply, that means 4 is 8% of 50. That is fine. It needs to be no more than 40%. So obviously with 8%, we've got quite a lot of slack here. What that's really saying is that you don't need to have as many as 50 staff to make this work. And if, for example, you've got a typical husband and wife type company, you could potentially do it with as few as 5 people on the payroll. But this one comfortably passes that. So here's the valuation bit, which is more subjective and is the bit that quite often founders will say, what? My company's worth way more than that. Well, we're sort of giving an indicative suggestion of £6 million value for this business. Then just stressing that whilst we'll say it's a tax-free sale, we're really talking about capital gains tax there. There will be stamp duty payable. Now, stamp duty is payable by the buyer of the business. So if you're selling your business in a trade sale, you don't care. The buyer will pay that. But remember that the buyer is the trust. The trust will be getting its money from the company. So effectively, the company will be funding the stamp duty out of its own profits as well. We've then just given an indicative payment plan. So you may remember this company, whilst it had about 3 million in net assets, it had about £500,000 in the bank. So again, this is a bit simplistic. And for example, it may be from some of Spencer's comments that a big chunk of that 3 million is actually an overdrawn director loan account, in which case potentially some of that could really be considered here, where it might not be a cash transfer, but it's still an upfront transfer of value. It's just money that the founder had already taken. So, you know, in practice, you could consider that the founder put that money back in, physically put that money back into the bank account. The company now has a much higher bank balance. It can pay a much higher opening payment. But yeah, we're looking at about that much up front and then 52 grand a month for 107 months. So that's quite a long time. What's that, about 8 years? Now, it may well be that if the business does well, continues to grow, it can start to increase these. You know, perhaps in the first year, that might be a big chunk of the profits. But if the business carries on growing, that might start to feel a lot more modest. Where that's the case, the business has choices. You know, wonderful situation to be in. Either they can say, well, the staff have made this work really well, so the staff are going to get nice big profit share payments, and they can get that even while we're paying out the founders. Or they may be of the view that, you know what, we'd rather clear this debt a bit quicker. So actually, we're going to voluntarily overpay. So I just say, best example of this, or, you know, situation you've probably had in your own life, you've got a mortgage, you then get a bonus from work, or you get a pay rise from work. There's no right or wrong answer. Some people will be of the view, wonderful, I've got extra cash, I'll go on a nice holiday, I'll buy a car. Others will be of the view, you know what, I'm in a position to clear down a bit of my mortgage here. I'd rather do that and forego the nice things for a bit of long-term benefit. So there'll be the same kind of choice there. Here we just talk a bit about, more often than not, our valuation is lower than people are expecting. Could be a whole bunch of reasons for that. Maybe we're a bit stingy with our valuations, but I also feel like a lot of business owners, if ever they're hearing numbers, it'll be the highest one that they remember. You know, they'll have heard about that business that sold for 20 times EBITDA. So what do they think? My business is worth 20 times EBITDA. Well, unlikely. And below this, it just gives a summary of some of the details you put in, because people may well want to, you can either just see this on screen, and for what it's worth, you don't have to give any personal details, no email address, you can get all that data. But if you want, put your company name in, put your email address in, and it'll email you a nice PDF with all this data, so you can see what you put in, what the results are. And if for whatever reason you feel like, kind of like the idea, but doesn't sound quite right yet, by all means do it again in 6 months' time, see how things change. And then the final bit, yeah, just these EOT mindset results, just to check you're getting all ticks there because you're happy. So that's the tool itself, all done and dusted. I'm guessing, I think, Spencer, you've already got details of these, so you probably don't need me to email them through.
No, I've got them. Thank you. Yeah, I did all that.
Yeah, I'd very happily answer any questions, not just about this, but in EOTs in general, especially if people are a bit interested in it, but there's real concerns they've got, then please shoot, and I'll turn off the screen share if I can. I'll do it.
I think the result, by the way, was not too dissimilar from sort of a trade sale valuation. So we're looking at an adjusted EBITDA of probably about 1.2 million on those numbers, and probably looking at 4 to 5 times that. So that valuation didn't come out actually that dissimilar, interestingly.
Well, I suppose just to comment on that. So firstly, your EBITDA, your adjusted EBITDA, you've come out at 1.2. I mean, I can tell you from the numbers we put in, we'd have been working on about 750, because the main adjustment is going to be coming down because the directors are being paid 176 or whatever it was, whereas maybe fair would be 300. So I'm guessing you've got some add backs there which we've not considered, or maybe depreciation might be one of them.
There's a whole host. There's a lot of costs that go through the business that someone else owning it would not have going through the business.
I'm guessing we're hinting at the lovely box at Wembley Stadium that only the owners use, that kind of thing.
It's those kinds of things. I think we should move on.
And the other thing to stress, part of the reason why we've come up with a fairly, well, you may have been pleasantly surprised at how high the valuation was. We're factoring in that there's 3 million of net assets just sitting in the company. So maybe if you're just doing it based on a multiple of EBITDA, that's ignoring the balance sheet value.
That's actually true. Yeah, I mean, wasn't looking at the sort of debt-free, cash-free element.
So so we've considered both of those. So once you factor that in, maybe the owners might be a bit disappointed because they might be expecting to add that on to the 6-ish million that you came out with.
Yeah. That's good. It's very interesting. It's something I'm going to actually talk to them about. I think their motivations are to sell and get the money as quick as possible, and I think that's the biggest detractor from this scheme, and the fact that they think they're the only ones that can run it. So and they did. The owner actually, when he was 100% owner, did try and step back from the business, brought in an expensive management team, and it collapsed. And that was about 7 years ago, and then that's when I was brought in to help fix it all. So luckily we're back on track again. But yeah, it has been tried before, so I'll talk to them about it as a sort of a point of interest. But I don't think it's something that's going to be.
I mean, I do think the longer time to get paid is probably the biggest turn off. With a trade sale, you very rarely will get all in cash on day one. Maybe it'll be over like 2 years or something like that, but it's typically going to be a shorter time frame. And the other thing you said that made me smile, founders sometimes forget that, if they've been doing this for 10 years, 20 years, they've made loads of mistakes along the way. And then if they pass it over to a senior team, the first mistake that senior teammate, the founder will be like, oh, well, that's proof you're no good at this. So I think you need to understand that they're going to make their own mistakes. They're going to find their own way.
Yeah, I think also the advantage of a trade sale is generally I find that the buyers feel that they can run it better. So they can, they can look at a business, and I've done it. I've been involved in purchasing businesses, and a lot of the team will be thinking, oh, we can strip that out, we'll do this, we'll make more money out of that. And I always think, I'm not sure that's going to be the case. And where we did buy a competitor, for example, a while ago, a long while ago now, hey presto, we didn't have both turnovers joined together. Some went missing, and there are all these sorts of things that occurred. So it didn't quite happen as
well, I think we're all familiar with the fact that solving other people's problems is so much easier than solving our own. Other people's problems are really simple. Just do this. Ta-da. Anyone else in the room got any queries?
Any questions? Any points anyone would like to raise? One thing I would like to raise is if you're selling to trade or you're selling to a PE, part of it is the process of showing that the senior management team are in place, that the business can run without you, and that has to be demonstrated and proven. In my case, the first business I sold, I mean, it was like a series of different interviews and chats and meetings that they had with our senior management team, and they did a good job because they were running the business anyway. We established that we had to come from day to day out of it and allow people to take the reins, and that give them a lot of trust and desire to move forward anyway. Now, what would you say is the best way to speak to your staff about an EOT, Chris? How would you approach it? Because some will bite your arm off, and then there will be others, depending where they sit on a risk register and risk axis, the risk axes, if you like. Where would you say is the best place to start this conversation?
With caution, and probably later than you might think is appropriate. So I think it's important that you, as the founder, discuss it perhaps with your financial advisor, accountant, perhaps with your significant other if you have one, to check that firstly you understand it pretty well and that you're relatively confident it's something you want to go down before you mention it to staff. Because Ollie made the brilliant point there that everyone is different, and you could tell two of your employees and one of them goes, "Oh, awesome, I've always wanted to be in charge of this business, that's amazing," and the other one just totally panics, and a lot of it probably irrational, thinking, well, I can't afford to buy the business. If you're selling it to the staff, that means I have to pay. No, you don't. So I would suggest make sure you understand it pretty well first. Obviously, you don't have to have an answer to every possible question. Be very aware that your staff's initial reaction may be more negative than you expect. I think a lot of employees are employees because they're quite happy being employees. They are quite happy that there is someone else above them who is responsible for making the decisions and responsible for sorting it out if it all goes wrong. I just come in, I do as I'm told, like a good little boy or girl, and I get my salary. There's a lot of people where that's what they want. So, obviously, if you own a business, you're not that kind of person. You're someone who is happy to take on the risk and responsibility of it being your thing. Just be a bit careful that some of your team, even the most senior team, might not have that mentality. So approach it with gently.
And there will be people within certain organisations who will be so risk averse that they might see that their job's under threat and start looking at alternative options. So you really have to tread carefully and think about how you're going to do this.
Yeah, there'll be people that will say, hold on, you're selling. That means you have no faith in the future of the business. It's a perspective. That means you think it's about to go down the boot. You're going to disappear off into the sunset and you want to leave me here holding the can. Perhaps also you've been my mentor and, I'm here partly because of you. I'm not sure I want to do this without you. So yeah, I do think a lot of founders assume that their senior team will say, wow, wonderful, what I've always wanted, and then don't quite get that reaction. But I would suggest once you decided it's a route you want to go down, or you're 90% confident it's a route you want to go down, discuss it just with a handful of your most senior team first. The reality is they will be the ones that will make or break it. To be a bit blunt, the more junior staff, the kind of bulk of the rank and file are a bit more replaceable if they don't like it, so are less of a concern. But that senior team, you're going to need them to be on board. And maybe also worth saying, we talked a little bit about the beginning about selling 100%, selling 60%, whatever it may be. And I sort of pointed out that separately after the EOT sale, I'd sold 10% to one of the most senior members. It is worth considering that kind of thing. So it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. So where I said staff don't put a penny in, with the EOT, with a pure EOT, that's the case. But you mentioned SEIS at the beginning. Probably a lot of you might be vaguely familiar with EMI share options. So very different to an EOT. The EOT is an exit plan and will benefit all staff. The EMI is where you are singling out a small number of key employees, but giving them the right to own a direct stake. So it can be beneficial to do both of those things. Yes, it's sort of continuing to have a them and us with, you know, the real owners, the direct owners, and just the normal staff. But most of us will probably acknowledge the fact that not all staff are equal. Some people will live, sleep, breathe the business and, you know, work weekends when it's required, do what needs to be done. Other people will come in at 9, do a great job, come 5 o'clock, they go home and they don't care beyond that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but the business needs at least one person, ideally a few people that aren't like that, that will really care and do whatever, you know, needs to be done to make it work.
Yeah, and
Thank
with
you very much.
this particular company we used as an example, one of the things that actually made the business perform so much better to get it back on track, because they're trying to exit, is actually building and nurturing that management team. It's just made a massive difference. You know, the buy-in and the performance has just improved so much. So you know, it's obviously important that they're going to take it on and keep running it well. But actually, by doing that, you're sort of empowering these people to, you know, to deliver better results anyway. So it's sort of a win-win.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the sort of softer things that we would recommend as part of doing an EOT sale are just good ways of running your business full stop. You know, like you say, they've still owned it, but they've empowered the management team, given them a bit more responsibility. And normally that's a win for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any
Well,
other questions from those who've been a bit quieter in the room?
guys,
So just quickly, those figures where it was payout per month, is that for each of the stakeholders that much, or is that like the proportion?
That would be the total amount between them.
Between them. Okay.
So I mean, I'm guessing the 4 shareholders, well, I've got nothing to base this on. I'm assuming they don't have an equal stake. I'm kind of assuming for no good reason that the children have a more modest stake. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the two that I was talking about is 80-20, and then the 80 is probably split sort of 90-5-5, you know, so that sort of proportion. So.
I mean, the key thing to remember is that they're being paid out of the future profits of the business. So what we've kind of based that loosely on is the business making 900,000 pounds a year in profit.
Yeah.
The payments to those founders will be from post corporation tax profits. So they're basically replacing dividends. So if we take off 25% for that, you're then down to about 700,000. We don't really want every penny to be earmarked to go out. So we want it to be a little bit of a buffer. So that's why maybe we're saying, well, let's have 600,000, maybe a bit less than that to go to the founders, hence where the 52 grand a month comes from. So it's purely based on that profit, and that, you know, we're hoping or expecting that will continue to be fairly similar.
Okay, thank you.
How do you get it? Do you need this valuation approving at some point then by HMRC? Or is it a self-certification thing?
I'm pausing. Well, I suppose the short answer is no. You don't need to get it approved by HMRC. Having said that, I believe HMRC do have the power to potentially come back further down the line and say that valuation was ridiculous. In practice, if I'm honest, I can't see that ever happening. Why? Because if the valuation was ridiculously high, it's just not going to end up working, and it won't be HMRC stopping it working. It will be the staff saying, well, hold on a minute. Look, we're now a year post sale. We've worked really hard. The business has made this much money. Most of it's gone to you. Nearly all of it's gone to you. And that's going to have to carry on for 10 or 20 years for you to be paid off. This just doesn't work for us. There's nothing in it for us. And on that basis, we're going to quit and go elsewhere. So people do need to understand that it's all very well saying, oh, well, someone will sign off a really high valuation for my business. Yeah, they will. If you ask 20 people to value your business, you'll get 20 different numbers. Pick the highest one as the correct one. But if it doesn't work financially for the staff, if they start to feel like, hold on, we've been sold a proper dud here, you're ripping us off, they could all move on. And if a bunch of them move on in quick succession, the business can collapse. So, you know, you need to have in mind that there needs to be something in this for the employees. They need to be able to see, yes, this can work out quite nicely for us. And the only reason that can happen is if there is enough profits relative to the valuation that, you know, there's plenty to go around.
And are they part of the negotiation on this then, or not? And what's the maximum term that you can pay out over?
So on that first question, theoretically, yes. So I know I've not gone into detail about trustees at all, but you're selling to a trust. The trust is set up with the beneficiaries being all the employees, but it will be controlled by its trustees. We would typically suggest there would be 3 of those. One of them would normally be one of the exiting founders. One of them would be a rank and file employee, and one of them would be an independent. So sometimes a business coach, accountant, someone like that who knows about the business but it's a bit separate to it. So those people will control the trust, and those people will be signing off as the buyer of the business.
Yeah.
They're not paying with their own money, but so it's on them to say, are we happy this is a good enough deal? And that's where the independent valuation comes in, because they'll hopefully be saying, right, someone who is entirely independent, is not, you know, in the founder's pocket, their best mate, has said, this is how much we think the business is worth, potentially, and here's our calculations, here's our justification. And the trustees may well be relying on that to check that they're not being sold a duff deal. But I say in theory, because the practice, I feel, is these things are quite easily got around. In that, as I established, you know, the independent valuation, ask 20 people, get 20 different answers. The biggest one is the correct one. That's what you show the trustees. The trustees are unlikely to be super savvy. One of them will typically be you as the vendor. So you've inevitably got a motivation to sign off a nice high sale price. The employee trustee, no disrespect to them, but they're unlikely to have a huge amount of experience buying and selling businesses, knowing what a fair valuation might be. So, and also you're typically their boss. So it'd take a very brave employee trustee to say, no, I refuse to sign this. So the independent trustee, hopefully, is someone with a bit of clout and less likely to suffer horrendous consequences if they say to the founder, I'm not signing this, I think this is bad. But in practice, it's very, very rare that they would do that. So yes, in theory, the staff have to be getting a good deal. In practice, no one often knows until further down the line, which is why I think it's important that you don't just go for the top end valuation, because at some point you will come unstuck.
Well, thank you everyone for your contributions and coming along. Chris, wonderful as ever. We want more of this, because you made a good point earlier that EOTs aren't that widely known and spoken about in our community, the founders ecosystem. And the more we talk about it and raise awareness, because it gives founders more options, and that's what we're all about, Start to Stand Up, understanding all of our options and looking at different routes, because that gives us as founders more power. All right, so we really do appreciate you, and please keep them coming. Please keep it coming. And any live examples, you know, we're always looking for data we can share with the community, so that'd be great. On top of that, you're going to be getting a lot of big ups, love and attention, shout outs, whatever you want to call it, on the various media, mainly LinkedIn, over the next few days. So get ready for that, and you know, respond please where you see fit. But let's build this awareness. Let's build this whole thing on EOTs, because it's a big point, a big area that founders can benefit from, and it's good.
Can I just ask, Chris, are you able to also talk about the EMI scheme at all offline?
I can a bit. So I've got reasonably good awareness of it, perhaps not quite the same in-depth knowledge I've got of EOTs. But yeah, so the overview with EMI is that it's not for all staff, it's for a small number of your key people. And certainly you can do this, and most people do this, not as part of a business sale, but it's more just, you know, I currently own 100% of this business. I've got perhaps a couple of staff who are really good, they're real go-getters, I want to keep them. So it's just basically a fairly tax efficient way of giving them a little piece of the pie. So you will be diluting your ownership a little bit, nowhere near as much as an EOT. An EOT, you're kind of cashing out properly. With EMI, you might be giving away, who knows, 5%, 10% of the company, something like that. So you're still going to own the vast majority of it.
Maybe I'll message you about that offline.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
Have a great weekend all. Enjoy the sunshine. I think we're set for some great weather next week as well. So enjoy it.